On this episode of the History of Heavy Metal, we're taking a look at the years 1999 and 2000 in hard rock and heavy metal. From new metal to Napster, post-grunge to Ozzfest, and everything else in the mosh pit. We cover it all here at Metal Mayhem ROC. So, guys, let's talk 1999. I mean, again, let's call it new metal and rap metal. It was still at the top of the charts, but, it was still sort of this divided fan base. Old school metal purists were holding on to the traditional stuff, but there really wasn't a lot of new stuff coming out. But yet all these other bands were at the top of the charts. Like, what do you guys think about 1999 when you go back? Ian, what do you think about this year?
Well, and as we're elaborating too, but just to let the people out there know, I mean, as the 90s started to progress, the heaviness factor continued to stay there with the hard rock and the metal bands. And you started to see a little bit more of a convergence where it wasn't dissimilar to have some of these bands playing on bills together, whether it be at festivals or whether it be at, theater shows, whatever it may be, where they could pop up. So I think that, you're starting to see the ascent of what we started to get into the 2000s, where metal again was cool. Metal again was starting to explode. And, it started to open a door for things to really get exciting for all of us, I think.
Yeah. But you think about the bands, though, in 99, right? I mean, yes, Metallica released the live S&M album with the San Francisco Symphony Orchestra, but still, you think about all the bands that were at top of the charts, it was growing, right? Slipknot, Limp Bizkit, Korn, Cold Chamber, Rage Against the Machine, Static X. I mean, these were the bands and then there was the Me Too movement, right? Record labels were going after all these bands similar to those, right? And just like that happened in the 80s, you had a lot of clunkers that came with it. But, Bill, what were some of your thoughts about 1999?
To me, 99 was when I feel like that it was good. Things were starting to come back, like guitar solos, just the leads in songs. I mean, it never quite went away, but it wasn't for the mid 90s had like this total gray industrial feel to it. And I think that was starting to fade in 99. The color was starting to come back and music was to me was getting a little better again.
Yeah. Well, you had these, there was a big shift in styles, right? And, thinking of bands like, let's say, Slipknot and Marilyn Manson, these were now becoming the highlight bands on like the Ozzfest and that kind of thing, because there was a lot of visual aspects to these bands too, right? They were dressing up. Slipknot had the mask, Marilyn Manson had the shock factor, and that became like a really important part of hard rock and heavy metal. And I have to admit it, and I've said this before in previous episodes, I feel like I couldn't connect with that new metal movement. It was just too separated for me. It's not that I was holding on to the 80s rock, but I was like, I didn't get the way the kids that were 10, 15 years younger than me were dressing up and coming to these shows. I'm like, what is their persona? Or is this just a big act? But then you think of like something like an Ozzfest, like, as much as we loved the Ozzfest in 1999 because Black Sabbath, the original four Black Sabbath, they were the headliners. That was the big draw. I mean, if you think about tours in 99, really, there was not many that really had that big power. That was it. But outside of Sabbath on that tour, look who you had. Deftones, Slayer, Primus, Rob Zombie, I'm sure Manson, all those guys were on there. It was not your traditional metal fest anymore.
No.
Right.
Go ahead, Bill. Sorry. I was going to say, I think we had touched on this maybe a couple episodes ago, but like right now we're literally in the meat and potatoes of the quote unquote hot topic, period. When you're seeing the kids with the stovepipe pants, jet black with the chains hanging, black t-shirts, black eyeliner, black hair, everything is, they're totally getting into the character, which, I mean, if we were going to a Kiss show when we were younger, or an Alice Cooper show, you might see people with their faces done up and stuff like that. But it was just at the show. These kids were walking around day in, day out like that. It was now becoming even more of a way of life, maybe than even what it was, or at least on the same level as it was for people like us back in the day with your leather jackets and your, your war vest with your patches on it and your pins and everything else. So it was kind of a new trade in what the honor guard was wearing, kind of thing.
Right. I mean, you think of some of the albums like in that genre that came out that year. I mean, this was the debut album from Slipknot, self-titled. Again, I couldn't personally connect with it, but it was heavy. I mean, it was heavy. There's no denying that, right? But I think I was thrown off with the shtick they had with this. It wasn't just a 4 or 5 piece band. They had like 8 guys in the band, and they had these crazy clown outfits and stuff like that.
Sure.
But then you got like into the like Korn released Issues. That was another huge album, and it really went like it was played a lot on the radio, and I didn't quite get it because I'm like, how is Korn being played on the radio? Because it wasn't very melodic and colorful, had a weird like vibe to it. I know, Bill, you're a little more open to different styles of metal. Like, were you digging these albums, these two specific particularly?
Well, Slipknot was interesting for the most part because they incorporated all these different styles and it was very heavy. I mean, it was definitely heavy, but to me it wore off really fast. It was like, yeah, all right, that's cool. And then I don't know, like a few months later, I'm like, all right, I'm over it. And Korn too, I mean, when they first came around, yeah, they were different. I didn't mind them, but then by 99, I had fatigue. I was fatigued by that. And I say the same thing. I don't understand how they got so much radio play because they really weren't accessible to me. It was heavy. I mean, it was heavy and angry and there's brutal vocals at times, not like death metal brutal, but but yeah, I and just the the whole vibe of it all was very dark.
Yeah. Well, but then there was the, let's say, the opposite, the light that came to bands like that were on the radio. They refer to it as post-grunge, right? But you think
Mhm.
of bands like Creed, right? Creed was, I don't think we would definitely not categorize them as metal, but they were hard rock. But I mean, Human Clay was released in 1999. That album, it sold 11 million albums. I mean, Arms Wide Open, Higher, but then you go down the line. STP's number 4, Incubus was putting their stamp, and they had that kind of, not even like a rap thing. They would like kind of scratch, like with the old
Yeah.
Run DMC style,
Right.
Stellar
Right.
and Driver all over radio. Buckcherry came back. This was their debut, and they were like a little bit more traditional hard rock, which was refreshing because it was like, oh, you look at Josh Todd, he's all tattooed up to his neck. And that song Lit Up was all over the radio. But to me, it was like, oh, okay, well, at least this is just straight ahead rock. But we were still stuck with like bands like Korn,
Sure.
Slipknot, and Limp Bizkit. I think this was their pinnacle. I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nookie was a funny song lyrically, and you couldn't get away from it. It was on the radio all the time. But this is
Yeah.
what was dominating this year, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But I think, when you say that, Korn and Limp Bizkit kind of, even though Korn came first, they kind of had the same trajectory. Right around this time was when the wheels started to fall off a little bit. They weren't as popular. You know, uh, they all kind of went through some of their own headspace, issues,
Yeah.
between Durst and Jonathan Davies and everything else. But you're right, though. There's still a line of symmetry between, you take a band that's came from the grunge era with STP, putting out some really good hard rock stuff that they did then, kind of coming full circle back to that heavy, dark sound where they kind of escaped it for the 2 albums in between. Purple and, Songs from the
Yeah.
Vatican Gift Shop, they were a little bit of a diversion. They kind of returned to form. And then you had, like you said, you had your Incubus, and Creed. So they all kind of had a little bit of a connection when it came to that, you know, I call it that Mesa Boogie rock. You know, you got
Yeah.
those Mesa Boogie dual rectifiers. They're tuned down. It's heavy as hell, you know, and but it's, you know, some of it's like one side and some of it's the other side where it's like, okay, this is a little bit more accessible radio wise, where
Yeah.
this is not so much, you know, but they kind of already had made a name for themselves. That's it. I'm just throwing my 2 cents in. That's all.
Yeah, yeah, completely. I mean, you could throw in there Rage Against the Machine. They released the album, The Battle of Los Angeles. I mean, who could
Yeah.
forget that album cover? It's like an
Great album.
iconic album cover. The guy with the fist in the air, the silhouette.
Yeah.
I mean, but again, even for these guys, I think after this album, they were done. They broke up, right?
Yeah.
So you're right.
Yeah.
This was almost the peak year. Like we talked about 10 years prior, in 88 or 87 was that peak year for the hair bands, and it started to gradually decline. This was that kind of year, I think, when it came to these bands,
Yeah.
although they've still made a long career of it, 20, 30 years later. But getting into more, let's say, the mainstream releases, I mean, Bill, S&M for Metallica was probably the biggest release of the year. What were your reflections of this? Because this was the first of a kind for us, right? Weren't familiar with this, and I don't know if we expected it from Metallica.
No, it caught me off guard. I at first was like, "What? What are they doing? Why are they doing this?" And then, and then I listened to it, and I'm like, "Man, this is actually pretty damn good."
Yeah.
But it was definitely uh, they were thinking ahead, man. Because think of all the bands that have done that since. They were like one of the first bands to do that.
Yeah.
It was groundbreaking.
Yeah.
They, I remember I did not go to the show, but they did I think a couple of shows around the country, and they played Madison Square Garden. I remember a friend of mine went to it. And I remember him saying it was treated like if it was a symphony orchestra, like Carnegie Hall, where under your seats you had a sheet of paper and it said Act 1, Act 2. It named the director, Michael Kamen, et cetera, et cetera. So it was definitely treated with a different style. But again, this was another thing Metallica did that we have to love them for, because here we were not too hot on Load and Reload, and then they come back with this, and it was like,
Right.
where are we going, Metallica? But you're so right, Bill. I can only think of how many bands followed suit, and it was not so uncommon in the 2000s. I mean, I saw Deep Purple with a symphony orchestra. I saw Yes with a symphony orchestra. I mean, probably so many other bands. Kiss put an album out at some point, right? With the Australian
Kiss,
Symphony
the
Orchestra.
Scorpions.
Scorpions.
Yeah.
Yngwie Malmsteen did the whole thing with the Swedish Philharmonic or whatever it was. I mean, there was he did one in Sweden, he did one in Japan. I mean,
Yeah.
so I mean, they all were doing it. Everybody, everywhere. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's very
So-
reminiscent of the Unplugged that
Yes.
occurred in the '90s.
Yeah, it was another trend, another run
Yep.
on it. Exactly.
Yep.
So a couple things, other really big things that happened this year, good things for us, right? And I agree with you guys. It was they were starting to see the light coming through the dark clouds. But Iron Maiden returns with Bruce Dickinson and Adrian Smith for the U.S. Ed Hunter tour, right? That kind of came out of nowhere. And then David Lee Roth, all of a sudden out of nowhere, he goes back out on the road. And, for those of them that saw them that year, like Dave, all of a sudden he had long hair again, and he's got this great band, and he's got the guitar player from the Atomic Punks. I think his name was Brian Young.
Yep.
And it was like a very Van Halen centric show. And it was like, wow, this is what we've been waiting for. So there were definitely some good things on top of the Black Sabbath reunion tour. I mean, they toured earlier in 1999 with Pantera in the arenas. Then they came back only 4 or 5 months later and did the Ozzfest. I saw them all. But how about these bands, guys? Did you catch any of these tours? Maiden, David Lee Roth, Sabbath?
I did not, unfortunately. I caught Sabbath, but I didn't see David Lee Roth. He didn't come to Florida, and Maiden didn't either.
I was relegated to raising children, so I didn't get a chance to do a lot of big shows back
man.
then. So kind of shackled me for a while. So, but yeah, I remember I want to say it was either MTV or VH1 did a whole big section on their music news of the Roth tour. And when you would see some of the excerpts of it, he looked and sounded fantastic. It was like Pinnacle Dave,
Yeah.
didn't miss a step, It was right on cue. The band sounded great, so and then Maiden, I mean, Maiden's Maiden,
Yeah.
they rarely sound bad, that's just them. So
Well, it was also strange. It kind of came quick. I remember the Maiden because you think about it, Blaze Bayley was only in the band for what, 3 years, two albums over 3 years or
yep,
so, and
yep,
next thing you know, he unceremoniously just he's out and Bruce is in, and you're like, oh wow, Bruce is back, and but it's
right.
just a tour, and then they come back the next year with an album. But it was definitely I think healthy for them. I saw them at the Hammerstein Ballroom in New York City, which was a small place. They didn't go right into the arenas at that point. They were probably being a little bit cautious, but definitely some good things. Now, off air, Ian, you were talking about like you have some family that live in Rome, New York.
Yeah.
In Rome, New York, there was a big, like another Woodstock festival up there.
Oh yeah.
And all I can remember was yeah, Metallica, Megadeth, Godsmack, and there were a couple of other hard rock bands that played on it. It was a very mixed genre, but
Yeah.
it was like it was not a good
No,
festival.
no.
It was really hot, and
Yeah.
apparently it was just like run down, and there was vandalism and crime and sexual harassment. Like everything that could go wrong went wrong. Like, do you guys recall watching this on pay-per-view or MTV or anything?
Yeah.
I
We
do.
watched we watched it real time. Just I'll give you a quick excerpt, but then Billy, you jump
Yeah.
right in. So while it was going on, I was this close to trying to go because even if I didn't have a ticket, I knew how to get onto Griffiths Air Base. I knew that we could probably sneak on, catch the shows, sneak off, whatever we wanted to do. And we were watching that afternoon when Limp Bizkit got on stage, and it was everywhere. Every news outlet in upstate New York, central New York, everybody had somebody there with cameras, and if they didn't, they got there real quick because it was big news. I mean, it was piss poor planning on behalf of the promoter. They just
What did
did
he
not.
do? What did Limp Bizkit do that was so controversial?
So apparently around the walls of the performing area and in the front of the stage and everything, they had these huge plywood walls they were painted with murals and they had banners on them and everything else. And people started breaking stuff, like they were just ripping the panels off the walls and everything else. So he asked for someone, he's like, oh, that's badass because a guy was crowd surfing on top of this piece of plywood. And he goes, bring that over here, and he gets on top of the plywood and he surfs out a little ways into the crowd and he's doing whatever. But nobody's paying attention to what's going on in the back in the meat of the crowd. And in the meat of the crowd, there's fist fights. People are tipping over the porta johns because they're full of shit. I mean, it
Mm.
just all of a sudden started going crazy. And they tried to put the blame on him for instigating because they're doing break stuff at
Okay.
the time when this is going on. And it's like, I didn't hear him say, tear this fucking place down, rape the women, tip over the porta johns, set everything on fire. No, it just escalated fast. But
Yeah.
they had bad security, and it really got out of control. It really, really, really fast. It was way different than what 94 was, that's for sure.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah. I guess not a good memory in the
no,
in the
No.
Woodstock history.
no, no.
Now I wasn't there myself, so I can only speak from what I could see on the TV.
Mhm.
But to me, it wasn't a metalhead crowd. It wasn't a metal crowd,
No.
and it looked like a mix of like meth heads and douchebag jocks. That's the kind of people that were at that thing.
Yeah.
And I think somehow, some way, Limp Bizkit just got them fired up, and
Yeah.
and they all got blamed on the metal community from there.
Yeah.
If you remember, there was a point where it was like, oh, you metalheads are a bunch of scumbags. Because I mean, there was rapes, there was murders, and
Yeah.
Yeah.
people OD'd. There was a whole bunch of people that died at that thing. It was pretty bad.
Yeah. They
Yeah.
said that there was quite a laundry list when they were finally trying to arrest people, there was quite a laundry list of drug dealers from out of state, out of the area that came up just to try to make a profit,
Yeah,
raise hell, whatever, off this event. So, I mean, it was pretty gnarly, but,
right.
you know,
Yeah.
such is
Yeah,
life.
definitely. Yeah, definitely not one. I'm sure in hindsight, they're probably
No,
looking back and saying, "What were we thinking? Why did we do this? Should have left well enough
well enough
alone."
alone. Yep.
Well,
Right.
the maybe the other big thing, and I wouldn't even call it it's not an incident or an event, but um Napster was introduced. And I got to be honest, like at the time, I didn't really understand what file sharing platforms were. Bill, did you catch on to this thing that early? Did you understand what this was back then?
I did not. I only knew what it was because I had a friend that was into it, and he was a I don't know what the technical term is. He was somebody that shared stuff. I remember he had like a bank of computers that he had thousands and thousands of songs on there.
Yeah.
And so that was my only that's the only way I knew anything about it because I was still buying CDs. I was occasionally buying vinyl and, still jamming cassettes.
Right.
So, I mean, I didn't have any tunes on my computer at that time. So, you know,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
It,
it would be what would come the following year in 2000, where this was a landmark incident in music history where Metallica sues Napster. But we'll get into that in the next year. But guys, what were some of your, let's say personally, what were some of your more memorable albums? Bill, take us through a couple of your favorites from this year.
Well, there was a lot of death metal released that year. Honorable mentions like Immolation and Opeth and um there's a lot of good albums came out in the heavy genre, but the albums that I really liked the most, believe it or not, were Cannibal Corpse, Bloodthirst. Even though I don't think this album was quite as good as the previous one, but it still has some rippers on there. Pounded into Dust, Unleashing the Bloodthirsty, and the Spine Splitter. And it was
wrestling
actually the
move.
first album not recorded at Morrisound and not recorded by Scott Burns. It was
Mm,
Colin Richardson that was at the helm. I don't know if you remember him.
mm,
He was kind of a producer in the new metal realm at the time.
yep.
That's not really new metal, but he was more into more commercial stuff.
Yep.
And so the production on that album's really good. But to me, it wasn't quite as up to snuff as some of their previous stuff.
Right.
And then another album I really liked is AFI Black Sails in the Sunset, which is very different for me. Although I'm not, I do like some hardcore. I like a little bit of punk, but I would never call myself a punker. But they're definitely in the heavier, faster, hardcore punk scene from California. And the only reason why I even knew about them was because I went to go see Sick of It All, and they were playing with Sick of It All. They actually opened up for them, and they blew me away. I mean, I couldn't believe how good those guys were live.
Right.
It was like the whole crowd knew every word to every song, and I'm just like blown away. Like, what? What? I never even heard of these guys, and they were just really good. Great album. Um, Malleus Maleficarum, Clove Smoke Catharsis, and God Called in Sick Today. Those are some of the standouts, but it's a really good album. You should check it out if you get a chance. And another one that I really loved was Arch Enemy, Burning
Mhm.
Bridges. And to me, that this album really set the tone for guitar. Because if, like I was saying, the guitar was kind of took a backseat in the 90s. Aside from Dimebag and a few other guys, there wasn't not a lot of lead work, not a lot of guitar melodies going on.
Right.
And this album was just chock full of sick leads and lots of good melodies, good memorable riffs. And it was the last album that the singer Johan Leva was on before Angela Gasso joined.
Mhm.
And it's just a really good album. I still listen to it occasionally. And then another album I really liked was Filter, Title of Record. which
Yeah,
is not a metal album at all, but it's
sure.
got its heavy moments. It's rock, or
Yeah.
industrial rock, I guess.
Yep.
And I liked it because there's like an edge to it. It's you know, Richard Patrick has just a weird kind of voice, but he has a lot of angst in his voice, and he does a lot of like
Yeah.
screaming where he's like, stuff
Yeah,
like that. And it's just to me, I love that kind of stuff. And that one, Welcome to the Fold, that's a rocker. Captain
yeah, of
Bligh, and then if you remember, Take a Picture was a huge hit.
course, of
Yes,
It
it
was
was.
course.
actually like a I mean, I heard that on like AOR stations even.
Yep.
Yeah, that was
And
a
it's funny because I
time,
remember
anyways.
reading an article that a woman, middle-aged woman bought that album on that song alone and then was like, oh my God, it was like heavy metal. It was so loud and obnoxious.
Right.
So I thought that was pretty cool too. And then I don't know if you guys are into that album, but there's a secret track, and at the very end, it's just Patrick's just screaming and yelling and carrying on
Really?
and throwing beer bottles. It's
Oh,
pretty
that's
funny.
awesome.
That is a good band. I actually saw them earlier this year, opening up for Jerry Cantrell. I think he's the only original member, but those songs are great. Welcome to
Yeah.
the Fold is heavy. I agree with you, and they
Yeah.
were
Yeah.
definitely a unique band for sure, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. They weren't pigeonholed into one category, so to speak.
How
Right.
about Bill? How about Bill dropping not only stabbing westward before, but now dropping filter? Who would have thought that the Rager would be into stabbing westward
Do
and
I get a
filter?
hand in my metal card?
No, you're good, man, but that's awesome. That's awesome. It's all heavy, man. It's just
That's
different.
all.
Just different.
How about you, Ian? Any particular favorites from this year of yours you worth calling out?
Well, obviously I always love Typo Negative. World Coming Down was a dark, different album, but it was one of those saving grace albums for me. I started
Mhm.
getting into some of the stoner doom stuff. Alabama Thunder Pussy, which I thought the name was fantastic, so I had to
Yeah,
check out the band. They released River City Revival. Great, great album. Got a lot of groove, a lot of heaviness to it. Um, I still, Dream Theater had live scenes from a memory. The concept album, fantastic freaking album. It is just, I mean, you don't realize for as long of an album as it is when you put it on, it's almost like watching a movie, and then it's done, and you're like, oh my God, that was fantastic. And then you had stalwarts like Overkill did Necroshine,
sure.
Merciful Fate had Nine, which another return to that heavy, it was just glorious to have them putting out an album. So
Yeah, it's a
yeah, that's
great
just a
album.
yeah, it's just a handful of them that, I mean, there was a lot of good stuff coming, but I mean this, like you said, Walt, I mean, 99, there was some stuff, wasn't a whole lot of stuff, but there was some stuff, to kind of tinker around with. How
Yeah.
about you?
For me, I mean, there's only two I want to worth calling out. I think the first I was disappointed in, but it's worth calling it out was I felt this was probably Megadeth at its lowest point of that period of the band. They released Risk. I
Yeah,
remember the song Crush 'Em was kind of a cool song, but it was used on like the
wrestling.
wrestling TV shows and stuff like that. And I
Yeah,
remember the song Breadline, and I think Marty Friedman was on his way out. And I remember seeing him at the Roseland, and I think
yeah,
they put too many albums in a short period of time, starting a Rust in Peace, and we were burnt out on that Megadeth, that Rust in Peace era Megadeth. It was time for them to take a break and reset. But I agree with you on the Overkill Necroshine. You can never go wrong with an Overkill album. That
yep,
was just another good one in the 90s. And the other one was Queensryche put out Y2K, which to me was a pretty good album. I wouldn't call it
yeah,
great, but it was pretty good. And it was also the first album without Chris DeGarmo. This had
yeah,
Kelly Gray in there, who I believe was a friend of Jeff Tate's and had done some work with him in his solo band, but not a bad album overall. Those are some of the ones that we can recall from 1999. But for our listeners, we welcome you to do your own research, right? We can't cover everything on here. This is just a sampling of our observations of the year, but get in there, do your own research, and find out and revisit for yourself. So we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to get into the year 2000, which is a good one. So if you like what we're doing, leave us a review and subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts. We'll be right back. Guys, getting into the year 2000. Wow. Well, 2000 to me, this was a turning point year. I mean, lots and lots of good stuff that came out of this year. But again, getting right into it, again, you're still seeing the new metal trend. Now new bands are coming in. Linkin Park is the big hitter. They hit their career album is their debut release, and they'll probably never ever top it. They were at the top of the charts. Papa Roach was coming in, another rap metal band. They were at the top, but then you have bands like Limp Bizkit fading out and Disturbed coming on board. Disturbed was another byproduct of the Ozzfest family, right? They came up through the roots of the late 90s. They were like Godsmack. They were on the second stage. Now they're coming up and they're releasing their own albums and they're getting really, really big airplay. But maybe for you, Bill, first, what was 2000 for you? You seem to like this year. Tell us why.
It just, to me, it was like metal's back. To me, traditional metal. Like I said, guitars were back in the fold. People were starting to sing again. It wasn't as gray and dismal as the '90s were. And Dio Magica, that album to me is just phenomenal. It's probably my third favorite Dio album aside from the first two. And to me, it was a great return to form for him because, the couple albums he had previous to that, Anger Machines and what's the other one? I can't think of it, but that was a dark period for Dio. Those albums were where he was singing really pissed off, and which, they weren't bad or anything. It just wasn't traditional Dio.
Yeah.
And I thought Magic was...
Right. And he also, because he had Tracy G, right? And it was the other album you're referring to was Strange Highways, but there was the return of Craig Goldie, Jimmy Bain, and Simon Wright. So, and again, it was revisiting the past, the old Dio era, right? And it was a concept album. I was into this too. Great tour. He had Yngwie Malmsteen out there with him. He did a long show. He did a lot of stuff from Holy Diver on that tour. It was a really, really good rebirth. I was right there with you on that one.
I saw him with Doro. Was she with them too when you saw him?
Yeah.
Yeah. And she did a scorching rendition of Long Live Rock and Roll with Ronnie. I thought that was killer.
Yeah. And that was just, I think, a sampling of so many of the other bands that kind of returned to form. We got some good tours out of this year. But Ian, what's your outlook on 2000 as a whole here?
That post-grunge, kind of a touch off new metal, like you said, Disturbed, Godsmack, stuff like that. That was like the norm. That was what you were hearing in heavy rotation. They were the bigger bands. You still had, old guard guys that were out there, but like these were the guys that when you were seeing these large, tours, festival events and stuff like that, they were all over the place. Their stage shows now got, mammoth. I saw Godsmack on the Awake tour in Utica at the Odd, and it was just amazing when you saw them. It looked like something from a Sabbath set. It was all stone walls with gargoyles, and they would shoot fire out of them and everything else. And I'm like, this is a metal show. This is great. I love this. So it was a good time. To finally, as Bill said, we kind of turned a corner, and kind of everything guitar and metal and stuff was coming back, and it was coming back good. So.
Well, and they were the one band that bridged the gap between, let's call it like the post-grunge or new metal era, because they were more of a traditional hard rock band. There's not many metalheads that don't like Godsmack. Let's just be honest. And they've stayed true to their form. I think, when they first came out, right, everybody said, all right, we'll prove it again. And they came back with Awake, and they proved it again, and they've proved it again and again and again, right? You get what you get with Godsmack, right? But you think of a band like Disturbed, like it took some time for me to warm up with these guys, but they were just a unique beast of their own. You can't even describe them. I mean, Dave Draymond has this weird thing he does, and it's just this signature sound, yet they were very, very heavy and dark. They fit right in perfectly at this generation. Were you guys into Disturbed at all?
Not really into them, but I did, I don't dislike them. I appreciate them, but I know what you're saying. They did have a good sound, and it was again, it was keeping in that Korn category because they got tons of radio play.
Yeah.
But I think that they were a little more accessible than Korn, let's say, Um, but it's funny because if you look back, in the early 90s, those Disturbed was actually playing with a lot of death metal bands. They were
Wow.
on a lot of
Wow.
tours. They did the Milwaukee Metal Fest a couple times that I'm aware of, and so they were around for a little while before they finally hit it. And when they did, man, they were huge. That was everywhere. You couldn't escape that.
Oh yeah. No.
No,
Yeah,
you think
they
about it,
got
here it is, 25th anniversary of that album. I just saw them at Madison Square Garden a
right.
few months ago celebrating that album. It's crazy. 25 years ago. It doesn't seem like it.
No.
Wow, yeah.
Time flies.
Yeah, time flies. But I mean, some of the other trends in 2000 before we get into, let's say, the traditional bands, but you think of things like the female fronted stuff was starting to pick up. Kitty was out there. Otep, Lacuna Coil launched this year, and this was just the very early start of these female fronted bands that would just explode over the next 20 years. And then you had bands like we would call them like more melodic, atmospheric hard rock. And I think of bands like Deftones and Perfect Circle was the other one, right? Maynard James Keenan, right? I love that band because I love Tool, but when he came back with a Perfect Circle, I was like, well, what is this? It's like overtly melodic and these big overtones and very, very different. And I think that was a really nice contrast to Tool, but this is what you got with bands like this. I was never really into the Deftones. Have you guys grasped to those guys?
I liked their first album somewhat only because I saw them live, and it wasn't that I was into them. I just went and saw them, and it was a great freaking show. I mean, it was killer. But I always thought that singer was just he's kind of out of key. He doesn't sing in key, and he's not really that great of a singer. But whatever. I get why people like him. I mean, I would say that they're one of those bands. I not really love or hate, but they're a good band. I just never fully dove into them. But I've seen them live a few times, and they always were great live.
That they always had a very symmetrical line with me, like a Rage Against the Machine. Rage was more rap kind of vibe to it, but they're both that LA kind of, especially Chino Moreno, it's always about the the uh, the hood that you came from, where you lived and everything else, which is funny because you have someone like Adam Jones from Tool, went to school with Tom Morello, who came from Chicago. These were guys that went to GIT learning how to shred when they were younger, but they come in and they do these other bands and they're taking a whole different direction because it's paving their own way. Deftones were kind of that same way. They kind of had a really different vibe from the first album. But White Pony, it's got this dark heaviness to it. It's just a really unique album. And it's not even a favorite. It's just I remember hearing it going, who's these guys? Oh, it's Deftones. I go, oh, that's pretty cool. It's not bad, So it's something that us old headbangers could sink our teeth into a little more easily, I guess.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
And what about an album like Hybrid Theory from Linkin Park, right? This was their debut release. I mean, it exploded commercially. I mean, this was all over the radio. You still hear it all the time. I mean, songs like One Step Closer and Crawling. I mean, happy for those guys that after the tragic, death of Chester Bennington, they came back 5-6 years later and they're doing it all over again. But like, this wasn't just a big album. This is like one of the biggest rock albums of all time. It's up there. Again, I can't say I went out and bought it, but it was hard to avoid it. And I guess in a sense, it kind of just got ingrained in you because you heard it all the time. But not my cup of tea to go see them live, but I fully respect these guys.
Chester was an amazing singer. I mean, the dude
Yeah.
had he could sing, like actually sing, and he had, I mean, it was one tune. It was probably like one of the longest screams in the history of metal.
Yeah.
And the dude could scream, man. He had a righteous scream, so I'll give him that. And I remember that album came out. It was like instantly huge. You heard like three or four
Yeah.
songs were everywhere you looked, and
Yeah.
and they got big fast, and I see why. They definitely they hit it off with people that are in that dark place, that their lyrics are about that, but they sort of bring hope to people, I guess.
Right.
It's too bad what happened to Chester. I mean, personally, I
Yeah.
don't. Well, that's a whole nother story. We won't even get into that, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
but you know, I see why they were as big as they were. But you're right; they'll never match that album. There's no way. I
Well,
don't
and
think
it
I don't
had
know
a
if any band will.
there was an energy to it too that I think that people that are fans of rock or hard rock could get behind from the old guard. But like the kids, I mean, I remember, my daughters were young, but this was one of the albums when the videos were coming out that all of the kids migrated to. And you look at somebody like Chester Bennington, it's just like looking at one of the singers from one of the hair bands back in the 80s. The young girls see him, he's a good looking guy. He's got this certain way about him or something like that. Next thing you're paying more attention to them, but you're listening and the music is coming out and it's actually got some quality to it. And
Yeah.
it was like encapsulating everything that occurred up to this point. You had the little bit of the hip hop with the scratch kind of thing and the thunderous, the chugga chugga like a corn or whatever else. But then it was right in the middle. It was like just a straight up hard rock album. So it was pretty cool, I think, for kids.
Yeah, definitely. And it was definitely again, it was just another one of those signs of the times that, all these continuation of variations of hard rock and metal were constantly growing. Like the
Yeah.
trees are just sprouting out. This was just yet another one, right? And I guess, we don't always have to like all of these subgenres.
Sure.
But when you think back, and maybe the traditional metalheads would say, the 90s and 2000s suck for metal. Well, if you open your mind up and you think about it, it really didn't, because look at the breadth of material that came out of it, right?
Yeah.
And that's the most important thing you think about it. It was really good for the state of hard rock music. But
Absolutely.
we're going to touch on some of the other events and tours a little bit later, but let's get into some of these other albums, guys. I know the three of us are going to geek out about some of these ones, so let's just get into it. Iron Maiden releases Brave New World. Bruce and Adrian return. It's a triumphant comeback from these guys. The Wicker Man, Blood Brothers, Ghosts and Navigators. Awesome summer tour. It was Maiden, Queensryche, the Halford band. I mean, that was the summer tour of the year. I mean, what was this album to you? I loved it.
I totally dug it. I remember because I hadn't heard a lick of it until they dropped the video for Wicker Man on MTV. And I just happened to be sitting there and you hear that riff come in with that. And I was like, oh, wow, what's this? And then all of a sudden across the bottom, you see Iron Maiden, Wicker Man, Brave New World. I was like, what? And it was just, I thought the whole album was great. Getting Bruce and Adrian back in there, it was just it was a welcome home party that I think everybody wanted at that
Yeah.
particular point.
And you know what? Good for them, where they reintroduced the band in a live setting only a year before, just to get them out into the markets on the Ed Hunter tour we talked about earlier, and then they get an album and a big summer tour. So it was like typical Iron Maiden, Ron Smallwood, perfectly well thought out business plan, and they did it the right way, and it's still continuing 25 years later.
Bill, did
Bill,
you
was
see
this a
him on that tour?
I missed that tour. They didn't play in
Oh, that's
Florida.
right.
And unfortunately, I'm sure you guys probably saw it, or at least Lance, you probably
Yeah.
saw it.
Yeah, I saw it. I saw it three times. I mean, they played the PNC Bank Arts Center and Madison Square Garden. And And then I also
Oof.
drove out to Montage Mountain in Scranton. These were all within about a week and a half. I saw 3 shows, but I mean
Nice.
the other big draw on that tour was Halford because
Right.
he released Resurrection. This was again his return back to metal. Just on the
Yep.
album cover, him on the motorcycle, the head was shaved again. He's got the traditional glasses on, sunglasses. I mean, that album end to end is another one, man. I played the shit out of that album. And the
Yeah.
live
Great
shows were
album.
great because he went not just back into Judas Priest, but he was pulling deep tracks out, stuff Priest wasn't doing, and he covered Fight and he covered the new material. It was a really, really killer show.
Nice. That's awesome.
It was like he had a point to prove because the two album didn't really do that well, and
Right.
I think he he was probably mad at himself, and and he caught some criticism, so he was like, "I'm metal as fuck, and I'm gonna prove it to you."
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
And we said this off air, and I'm going to reiterate it so that way the popular people out there can hear it. But we saw this continuation of old guard bands coming back with material, and they were getting heavier, and they were getting more inventive again, or reinventing themselves in a new light while still keeping a foothold into what made them who they are. And when you listen to that Resurrection album, you could have plugged that in any point in between on the Priest catalog, and you would have thought that it was another Priest album. It sounds amazing. It's a perfect doorstep to Angel of Retribution, down the road a couple years.
It
Really,
was great
it is.
because he had also, to me, I always liked the idea that, who's going to be in Rob's band. So he comes back with,
Right.
two new guitar players, relatively unknown guys, Metal Mike from Jersey. It comes back with Pat Latchman, who would go on a
Yeah.
Damage Plan, Bobby Jarza back on drums, so he comes back with this new band. And it was great. Like he had something to prove. I mean, he's going on at 6:30 at Madison Square Garden, giving him 35 minutes. It's daylight, and it's
Right.
almost seemed wrong. You're like, why is Rob Halford like the second support act? It almost didn't seem right.
Yeah.
But he had to go back there and reprove it. But that was just, I love this time. I love that tour. I think both of those albums were important. Ian, you mentioned earlier off air, and I want you to take the lead on this one, but Alice Cooper released, to
Oh
me,
my
is
God.
one of his best albums ever,
Yeah.
ever.
Yeah. Brutal Planet. It was just like I said, it was that perfect implosion of what was going on at the time with all of these artists getting heavier. This was it was definitely a diversion away from what he's usually done. He's kind
Yeah.
of he's had some heavier moments, but like this whole album, it was almost like he was saying, okay, I kind of helped create this whole thing too. Let me show you what I can do when I get the right ingredients together and I'm getting in the kitchen, and let's see what happens. And I remember finally getting a chance to hear this, and I was like, I can't believe that this is Alice Cooper.
Yeah.
I thought it was a whole other band, a totally different
Yeah.
band. But with Alice guest vocaling, but I thought it was great. I thought it was fantastic, and you and I both definitely agree that this is probably one of the better albums. He's got great albums, but this is one of those ones that a headbanger could really hang their hat on in his catalog.
Oh,
So
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Did
yeah.
you like this one, Bill?
absolutely, yeah, it's a great album. Like you
Oh,
guys said, I mean, it's heavy, but it's Alice Cooper,
yeah,
and it made that year that much better. It made
right,
2000 that much better of a year. Really
yeah,
did.
That's
yeah,
that's so true. I mean, the title track, songs like Gimme and Wicked Young Man. I even remember even seeing the live show. Like there was one point like his band was dressed as like almost like SS soldiers. They were coming out and it was like some dark content out there too. I saw him in Asbury Park and that was not the good Asbury Park that it is in 2025. It was a shithole then. And it just
Oh
seemed
yeah,
like the right place to bring Brutal Planet because
you're
that
right.
was part of Asbury Park was part of a Brutal Planet at that time, but
Yeah,
definitely one of our favorites. But yeah, so many good albums from this particular year. AC/DC, I think of Stiff Upper Lip. I mean, here you go. It's an AC/DC album, right? I mean, you're going to remember one or two songs from the album, but the hype there was Phil Rudd was back in the band. I never
right.
saw Phil Rudd. They came out and toured. shockingly, AC/DC wasn't bougie in 19 or 2000. I remember
No.
seeing them at the Meadowlands and it was half filled. The upper deck
Really?
wasn't sold. Can you imagine
Wow.
that now? The upper deck was curtained off. It was
Yeah.
crazy. That's how few, maybe they sold 8, 9,000 seats.
Unreal. I never
Yeah.
would have thought because you think back to the early 90s, they were still packing them in these huge freaking, auditoriums, stadiums, hockey arenas, you name it. But
Yeah.
just that little bit of time off and the shift in cultures and whatever else. But that's, yeah, I can't wrap my head around that because this is still one of the 4, 5 bands that can get 300 people in a
Yeah.
soccer arena in Brazil going
Yeah.
absolutely nuts.
Yep.
So that's
Yeah.
that's
It's
funny.
now, Bill, how about you on reinventing the steel from Pantera? Was this one of your favorites? This was
I
also the
actually
beginning
love
of
that
the end of
album.
Yeah, it was the beginning of the end of Pantera, and it's such a
Yes.
heavy album, yet it didn't make sense that they were over after this.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't obviously the drugs and the inner turmoil was taken over, but to me this album was fantastic. I mean,
Oh,
I loved it. I still listen to it now and then. Just it's heavy and it's got some great, some of the lyrics and just I don't know. I thought it was great. A lot of people don't seem to like this album though. What do you guys think?
oh, I love it.
I think it's
I
good.
yeah. There's not a Pantera album. Even I can even go back and listen to some of the early pop metal stuff and appreciate it. But
Yeah.
everything with the 4 core members, not one of them has done me wrong. I mean, I thought that
Right.
I was so sad that this was the last album from them because, like you said, there was some material on here that was so killer. You were thinking to yourself, "Oh my God, what are they going to do next?" And then
Yeah.
they end. It's like,
Yeah.
come on, really? Yeah, it's just too
Yeah.
bad. It's too bad.
Yeah, it was too bad.
I kind of called it. I remember seeing them the year later in 2001 out in Chicago. And it was like, I can't remember what the name of the tour, but it was like a mini package tour. Slayer was on it. And I remember Phil Anselmo saying in the show, he's like, "This is the last time you're going to be seeing Pantera for a long, long, long time." He was alluding to this. So they knew this was
Yeah,
what was, I suppose, was going to happen. And,
it's
who would knew, years later, tragically, what would go down. And then here we are with a reboot of the band, but
right.
definitely a great album. But,
Yeah.
guys, let's go around the table again. Bill, take us some of your underground favorites or some of your best ones from this year.
Let's see. I didn't make a list, but Immolation again. Um showing my yeah, you caught me flat-footed because I didn't make a list for this year because honestly, I didn't think there was as
Okay.
much
Well,
underground stuff.
you
Well, that's fair.
you hold on.
That's okay.
You had to appreciate Nile, Black Seeds of Vengeance.
Yes, Nile Black Seeds of Vengeance. I'm sorry, it's a
All right.
I that one because that is a great album. That one's it's a classic.
And
Oh,
then, I mean, uh-oh.
Well, Bill, regularly scheduled program. We have hiccups here, so we're going to continue on and hope Bill comes out. What about you, Ian? What were some of your favorites?
Right off the bat, Stronger Than Death by Black Label Society. It was the first album to me, I liked it, but the production on it, because Zach had played the bass guitar through his amps, so the bass was very distorted. It wasn't more of a traditional bass sound, but Stronger Than Death with Super Terrorizer and some of the songs that were on there were just so good. They were so heavy. And I wasn't a huge fan of the whole album, but New Tattoo by Motley Crue is actually kind of fun, being that it's Motley Crue at this time period. Randy Castillo came in on drums for them. And this was after the last one. The girl from Hole had played
Yes.
drums on the tour with them, but Randy Castillo, you know, longtime Ozzy drummer, came in and jammed, and it sounded great. It's almost like having him in the band kind of reinvigorated Mick Mars in a way when it
Yeah.
came to some of the songwriting. So I thought that was pretty cool. Um, you know, to go down the list, obviously you had the Big Black by Orange Goblin. That was one of those
Yeah.
stoner doom bands that I liked,
Sure.
really heavy and cool. Um, and you can appreciate this. I know you can. Revelation by Armored Saint.
Sure.
That return with John Bush, it was like, oh yeah.
Yeah.
I was so happy because they have always been one of those bands that I loved, and to have them get back together, I really enjoyed. How
And
about
this is
you?
what I'm saying. I mean, look at the albums we've been just rolling down. They were either returns of members, returns of bands that haven't put albums out in a while, but just good material.
Yeah, yeah,
The return of Bill the Rager to this episode. It's a rebirth. And anyway, but maybe a couple of ones that I appreciated. I mean, this was also that generation of Motorhead. You got a new album out from Motorhead every two
right.
years. The
Yeah,
album was called "We Are Motorhead." Can't go wrong there. And of course, our Jersey boys, Overkill again released Bloodletting, the first
yeah,
with guitarist Dave Lintz. So this was like, again, one of those years that I think we're going to look back and say it was a gateway year. This was a pivotal year into what would come into the 2000s and beyond as we get into it. So,
yeah.
but let's talk a little bit about a few of the last things and some of the incidents that happened. So, along with all these great releases, I think to me, Ozzfest this year, this could have been the best Ozzfest year ever. You
Yeah.
had Ozzy went out with his band, but you had Pantera, Godsmack, Disturbed, Incubus, and then probably another 10 bands that played the second stage. I mean, they couldn't get better than that. I don't know if you guys
Yeah.
saw that one, but it was a good one.
I did. I saw it in West Palm Beach, Florida. Hot and
Nice.
sweaty.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I bet. Yeah. I was still raising children. I didn't go to Ozfest either.
But this was also a fun period to be an Ozzy fan. And we
Oh, of
we
course.
we've been thinking about it a lot the last 2 weeks since Ozzy passed, but this is almost like you could make a pilgrimage every summer. You knew
Absolutely.
Ozzy in some form was going to play.
Yeah.
It would be solo band, 2 years of Sabbath, back to the solo band again, but maybe with a different guitar player. Then they'd come back with 2 years of Sabbath, then Ozzy again. It was just like an annual thing, and it became really, really cool. And then, of course, was the Kiss first farewell tour. You guys forgot about that one, I bet. Do you remember 2000? This was they called it quits, and they went on the farewell tour.
Yeah.
I did not see him that year because last time I saw him before that was 98. And I forgot that they did that. Yeah, they started a farewell tour in 2000.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ray saw him. I can't remember exactly where he saw him. And, for him, it was fun because, I mean, it's the original Kiss guys, so, a lot of us were too young to be able to see them in the original incarnation when they were in their glory days of, yore. But he did. And, I mean, they're like every other artist that this is a farewell tour. It's just taking a while to say goodbye. It's taking a while to say goodbye. How many times have Kiss, Scorpions, they've all, said, oh, well, this is it. This is the farewell tour. Ozzy, no exception. The No More Tears tour or tours tour was
that was 92.
Yeah, 92, 93, whatever. Yeah, so
Yeah.
crazy.
Well, this was I mean I did see the show at the Meadowlands Arena. It was good because it was Skid Row and Ted Nugent open, so it was a good strong bill.
Nice.
But I remember it was almost like I was still riding the wave of the reunion. But you think about it, you look back at it now, reflecting, it was like, okay, 96 was the return of the band, 98 was Psycho Circus, and 2000 was the farewell. That's a lot of tours in a short window of time, 5 years.
Yeah.
But you would just go because they were changing the set list up. And I don't remember at the time being fooled by this being the farewell tour. I think these like the fake farewell tours weren't really a thing yet, right? It was almost like, all right, I guess Kiss is leaving. We'll see what happens, But sure enough, then they went on forever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever.
24 more years.
I'm saying.
Exactly. And here they are coming back again this summer, right?
And they're right. And they're another one. I mean, how many residencies have they had in Vegas, at this point? I mean, they had to have had at least 8, 10, They'll go there, they play for a couple of months, they rest up, they go back and they hit the road for a couple of months. It's I guess that's the new formula, the way that they're all
Yeah.
doing it. But
Well, let's face it,
Yeah.
these guys don't know anything else in life.
of
This is
course,
all they've
of
done
course,
their whole life, you
of
know?
course.
Yeah.
And Walt, for you, I mean, being, basically in their backyard, Meadowlands, if it's not Madison Square Garden, the Meadowlands, for a big, show, that must have been pretty cool though. Getting them
Yeah.
out there, big production,
That's what it was. It was just an easy show to go to. It was 20-minute ride, and
Yep.
it was just you know, just a good time. But
Yeah.
guys, the last topic we want to cover in this double episode, double feature is the controversial Napster lawsuit. Um, I mean, Lars Ulrich was behind this whole thing. I got to be honest, I don't remember the specifics. Do you guys remember exactly what went down and why it happened and what happened? Did this get to the courts this year?
So you guys got to recall the Mission Impossible soundtrack. They had the single "I Disappear." It was not supposed to be released until a certain date. Somehow, the kid that started Napster grabbed it and shared it, and that's what got the ball rolling with the whole Metallica and Lars getting their hair up in a prick about this kid because he did this. Now, rightly so. This was not released material yet. This was something that was completely unreleased, but somehow, whether it be from hacking or whatever happened, he got this material and released it as a file share. That's why they hurried up and quickly got the video out for the song and started pushing it on the radio because people were already getting it. So they wanted to make sure that they weren't going to lose any momentum on it. Even though they weren't selling any album, it was going on this movie soundtrack. Jump forward that next year, and Lars, like, I mean, it was like big news. Like he was like pissed. Like every time you saw him, he did not have a good thing to say. People were like, oh, well, you guys were involved with all the tape trading. He goes, but you weren't taking people's money when you were tape trading. You were sharing things with people. He said, he goes, this guy took my money before I'm paraphrasing,
Yeah.
but, in a roundabout way, that kind of thing. And he's like, it's one thing if the artist understands what you're doing and they give you the okay for it. It's another thing when you're taking it on your own and the artist, now all of a sudden, artist rights or royalty rights are cut out of it. So that was the biggest part of it. It was pretty intense, and people labeled him an asshole, but he was just trying to protect his product, his brand.
Well, I remember he had paperwork in hand that showed how many hundreds of thousands of downloads there was in a short amount of time.
Oh yeah.
And it was like, yeah, he's got a point, man. That's a lot of that's a lot of lost revenue.
Yep. Between Napster and Apple, those are the two people you can blame for the people that are now the playlist people. They don't listen to albums. They select their favorite song and plug it in. They don't know a damn thing about AOR and, any of that stuff from back in the day because that's the way they were raised. That's why the attention span nowadays is about 5 seconds. So,
which is why it makes it harder for, new artists to get out there and make material and sell it, right? How many times have we talked about this? You try to support new up and coming rock or metal bands, kids in their 20s and 30s that are putting out great product, but how do you get their music? You either got to go see them somewhere or buy their merchandise, and you go to their merch tables. It's do it yourself tables. They're breaking down the stages. They're performing in the band. They're selling merch. They're selling everything: t-shirts, stickers, patches, CDs, vinyl, anything they can, because there is no record industry anymore as a result of the start of Napster, which is where it all started, which leads us to the present day. But guys, this has been an awesome coverage of 2 years in one. So I thank you for your time, and I think that we got a lot to look forward to as we continue this series. So this has been good. And again, for our listeners, we hope you like these episodes. Subscribe to the show and leave us a review wherever you follow us. And do your research for yourselves. Listen to what you can and revisit the years. This is a lot of fun. So, guys, for Bill the Rager and Ian O'Rourke of Motorlord, I'm Metal Walt, and we are Metal Mayhem ROC.
Metal for life.
Thank you for listening to Metal Mayhem ROC. Check out our website at metalmayhemroc.com for information on podcasts, archives, links to all our live radio shows, and all sorts of info. Please like, follow, and share with everyone, even your non-metal friends. And always remember to keep it heavy.